Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable appetite of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, whose empire stretched from the Pacific to the edges of Europe, and whose dinner table was as ambitious as his battle maps. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Feeding Kublai Khan wasn't cooking. Hurrem's Sultan was not born to power, nor did her childhood suggest that one day she would rule over the most formidable empire of her age from behind a veil of intrigue, whispers and influence. She was born somewhere far away, most likely in what is now Ukraine, a girl named Roxolana, daughter of an Orthodox priest. Her earliest years filled with the rhythms of a simple provincial life, but fate is never kind in a straightforward way. And as the frontiers of the Ottoman Empire shifted and raids swept across the borderlands, she was captured by Tatars and sold into slavery, torn from her family and carried south into a world she could never have imagined, where Constantinople's palaces glimmered with minarets and domes, and where power was measured not by freedom but by proximity to the Sultan's heart. For within the Topkapi Palace, in the shadow of domes designed by Sinan and courtyards echoing with fountains, Hurrem would enter the harem, a place outsiders imagined as a mere pleasure garden, but which in truth was a labyrinth of politics, hierarchy and subtle rivalries sharper than any sword. A realm where hundreds of women lived, each dreaming of catching the Sultan's eye, each guarded by black eunuchs who ensured the harem remained a sealed world, mysterious, forbidden, and yet central to the empire's fate. And when young Hurrem was brought within these walls, no one could have predicted that her smile and wit would soon draw the gaze of Sultan Suleiman himself, the ruler known to history as Suleiman the Magnificent, whose empire stretched from Hungary to Mesopotamia, from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, a ruler both warrior and lawgiver, feared in battle and revered in court. And yet here was a young concubine who would upend centuries of tradition, because until Hurrem, concubines might rise in favour, might even bear sons. But none had ever been married by the Sultan, none had dared to dream of being queen, yet Hurrem dared, and her daring reshaped an empire, for Suleiman was enchanted not just by her beauty, but by her intelligence, her quick wit, and the way her laughter earned her the nickname Roxolana, the Laughing One. And as days turned into years, Hurrem bore him children, secured her place, and slowly bent palace politics toward her will, her story no longer that of a slave but of a consort, an advisor, and eventually the legal wife of the Sultan. A move so radical that ambassadors from Venice and Habsburg Vienna wrote home in shock, unable to comprehend how this break with Ottoman custom might shift the balance of power inside the court. For by marrying her, Suleiman elevated Hurrem above all rivals, and she, in turn, understood that her survival depended not only on love, but on ensuring that her sons, not those of rival concubines, would inherit the throne. So the harem became a chessboard, every piece a woman, a eunuch or a vizier, every move a subtle whisper in Suleiman's ear, every gesture laced with consequence. And as the empire marched to war in Europe and Asia, Hurrem secured her dominion at home, commissioning mosques, charitable works, soup kitchens for the poor, and endowments that made her not only the Sultan's beloved but a visible figure in the lives of his subjects, the people of Constantinople speaking her name with admiration, even as palace insiders trembled at her cunning. And yet behind the soft silks and jewelled veils lay ruthlessness, for rivals were exiled or eliminated, and even Suleiman's childhood friend and closest advisor, Ibrahim Pasha, who had once seemed untouchable, fell from grace, executed in part due to Hurrem's subtle manipulations, his palace confiscated, his legacy erased, and later, when succession rivalries threatened her own sons, the tragic death of Prince Mustafa, Suleiman's firstborn by another woman, carried whispers of Hurrem's hand. Whether true or not, her influence became legend, the kind of story that European envoys carried back to their courts, describing a woman who had risen from slavery to become queen, a woman who could bend the empire's destiny with a smile or a letter, for she corresponded even with foreign rulers, sending gifts, negotiating peace, her words carrying weight across seas and borders, and so night after night, in chambers scented with rosewater and musk, Hürrem would sit beside Suleiman, reading poetry with him, sharing counsel, shaping decisions, until her name was forever tied to his, her legacy intertwined with that of the empire itself. For when she died in 1558, she was buried not far from Suleiman, in a grand mausoleum beside his future resting place, a gesture that signalled her extraordinary ascent, a slave girl who became queen, a concubine who became consort, a whisper in the harem who became the voice of an empire. And as you drift deeper into the stillness of this story, imagine the echo of her laughter through the corridors of Topkapi, the gentle trickle of fountains in marble courtyards, the glow of lanterns casting soft shadows on tiled walls, and the knowledge that history is often shaped not by armies or laws alone, but by the unseen hands of those who sit closest to power, unseen, yet unforgettable, like Hürrem Sultan herself, a reminder that even in captivity, destiny may carve out a path that no one could foresee, and that the empire of Suleiman the Magnificent, glorious in battle and radiant in culture, carried within it the influence of a woman whose story begins in tragedy but ends in immortality. And so, as sleep gathers around you like the silken drapes of a palace chamber, let her tale linger like incense, reminding you that every empire has its hidden architect, every ruler his confidant, and every heart its secret sovereign. Few European queens, let alone Ottoman sultanas, wielded such penmanship on the international stage. At the same time, Hürrem carefully built a public image rooted in piety and generosity. In Islamic tradition, rulers and their families were expected to sponsor charitable works, mosques, schools, baths, and soup kitchens to provide for the poor and elevate their own spiritual standing. Hürrem embraced this duty with zeal. She commissioned the Hayaki Hürrem Sultan complex in Istanbul, complete with a mosque, a hospital, and a soup kitchen that fed hundreds daily. For the common people, she was not just a shadowy figure of palace intrigue, but a visible benefactor. Her projects stretched as far as Jerusalem, where she funded the construction of public baths and the restoration of aqueducts. These works were not just displays of piety, they were also tools of politics, tying her name to the spiritual heart of the empire and cementing her legitimacy as Suleiman's chosen partner. In the eyes of many, Hürrem had transformed from foreign captive to mother of the empire's welfare. Yet even this generosity carried political weight. By funding religious and civic projects, Hürrem created loyalty among the populace, a loyalty that acted as insurance against the hostility she faced at court. To her rivals, she was a schemer. To the people, she was the Sultan's wife who put bread on their tables and water in their fountains. In the dance of power, few moves were as subtle and effective as charity. Hürrem understood this well, and wielded it like a seasoned diplomat wields treaties. The greatest storm of Hürrem Sultan's life revolved around a single question. Who would inherit Suleiman's throne? For decades, Ottoman tradition encouraged brutal rivalries among the Sultan's sons, with brothers competing and often killing one another for the right to rule. By the 1540s, the empire had two clear contenders. On one side stood Prince Mustafa, the eldest son of Suleiman and Mahidevran. On the other were Hürrem's sons Mehmed, Salem, and Bazid. Mustafa seemed unbeatable. Handsome, charismatic, and a proven military leader, he commanded the loyalty of the Janissaries and the admiration of the people. Soldiers whispered his name with devotion, and the court elite often looked at him as Suleiman's natural successor. For Hürrem, this was a nightmare. If Mustafa became sultan, her own sons' lives would be forfeit. Ottoman custom dictated that rival princes be executed to prevent civil war. Her survival and that of her children depended on Mustafa's downfall. The struggle for succession unfolded like a long, tense chess match. Hürrem and her allies, particularly her son-in-law Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, began to poison Suleiman's mind with suspicions. They portrayed Mustafa not as a loyal son, but as an ambitious rival who might one day overthrow his father. Letters, rumours and whispers circulated, some genuine, others manufactured. Whether by design or by paranoia, Suleiman began to fear Mustafa's growing popularity. The decisive moment came in 1553 during the Sultan's campaign in Persia. Mustafa was summoned to his father's tent expecting recognition, and perhaps even a chance to command. Instead, he walked into a trap. Guards seized him, and before the army's eyes the prince was strangled with a bowring, a grim, silent death reserved for Ottoman royalty. The empire reeled in shock. Many soldiers wept openly, mourning the man they had hoped would be their future ruler. Mahidevran, devastated, was cast into obscurity. For Hurram, it was both a victory and a curse. She had secured the path for her own sons, but the blood of Mustafa stained her legacy. Even centuries later, chroniclers debate the extent of her role in his death. Was she the mastermind, or merely an opportunist in a system already designed for fratricide? Regardless, one fact was clear. With Mustafa gone, the future of the Ottoman dynasty now belonged to Hurram's children. By the time the dust of succession settled, Hurram Sultan was no longer just a wife, nor merely the mother of princes. She had become Suleiman's partner in governance, an unheard-of position for a woman in Ottoman history. While the Sultan's visitors met him in the council chamber, Hurram spoke with him in private, often influencing his decisions before they were formally discussed. Foreign ambassadors were among the first to notice her reach. Letters sent to European courts frequently mentioned Roxolana as a figure who shaped imperial policy. They described her as cunning, persuasive, and above all inseparable from the Sultan's inner circle. Some claimed she manipulated Suleiman with charms and spells. Others grudgingly admitted she was simply intelligent, ambitious, and shrewd. Either way, the West understood that ignoring her was a diplomatic mistake. Her influence was visible in the alliances the empire forged. When conflicts brewed between the Ottomans and European powers, Hurram's correspondence and quiet interventions often softened or redirected Suleiman's stance. She acted as a bridge between the palace and foreign rulers, blending political manoeuvring with personal charisma. In many ways, she blurred the line between consort and stateswoman. But her governance extended beyond diplomacy. Hurram was deeply invested in maintaining Suleiman's stability at home. She encouraged him to lean on loyalists like her son-in-law Rustam Pasha, ensuring that her faction remained strong within the imperial court. With Rustam as Grand Vizier, Hurram's voice effectively echoed in the very heart of state decision-making. Not everyone celebrated this. Many Ottoman elites resented her power, seeing it as a distortion of tradition. A sultana interfering in matters of empire was scandal enough. Doing so as a former slave girl from Ukraine was unbearable for those who clung to aristocratic pride. Yet time and again, Hurram proved herself indispensable. Suleiman trusted her with state secrets, relied on her counsel in matters of war and peace, and valued her perspective when balancing the empire's many factions. Her presence gave Suleiman something rare for a ruler surrounded by flatterers and opportunists, honest partnership. Together they crafted an image of an imperial couple, an emperor and his legal wife, working in tandem not unlike the crowned heads of Europe. For the first time in Ottoman history, the empire's destiny was being shaped not just by a sultan, but by his queen. By the early 1550s, Hurram Sultan had reached the height of her power. She was Suleiman's legal wife, the mother of his surviving heirs, and a recognised figure in diplomacy and statecraft. Yet, even for the most formidable of sultanas, time proved undefeated. The years of stress, childbirth, and political manoeuvring began to take their toll. Accounts from the palace describe her suffering from bouts of illness that left her weaker than before. Though never diminished in spirit, still she continued her work. Even as her health declined, she oversaw her charitable foundations, ensuring that her complexes in Istanbul, Mecca and Jerusalem were properly funded and maintained. These endowments were more than monuments of piety. They were living symbols of her legacy, feeding the hungry, housing the poor, and providing water and medicine long after she would be gone. For a woman who began her life in captivity, the thought of leaving permanent institutions must have been a source of pride. Her relationship with Suleiman deepened as well. By then, the Sultan was aging, scarred by decades of war and the emotional weight of his son Mustafa's death. Hurram became his constant companion, offering both comfort and counsel. Chroniclers note that she remained by his side, not just as a wife, but as a trusted partner until her final days. It was an unusual display of affection in a world where sultans often distanced themselves from their consorts once they had borne sons. Suleiman never set her aside, proving that their bond was something extraordinary in Ottoman history. In 1558, Hürrem Sultan died in Istanbul at around 56 years of age. Her passing shook the palace, though her enemies likely breathed sighs of relief. Suleiman, however, was devastated. He ordered that she be buried in a grand mausoleum adjacent to his own mosque complex, a site usually reserved for the most honoured of rulers. Even in death she remained at his side, forever bound to the man and the empire she had transformed. Though gone, her influence lingered. Her sons would inherit her ambitions, her charities would outlive her, and her story of a captive girl who rose to queenly power became legend. To some, she was a schemer who spilled royal blood. To others, she was the mother of an empire. To history, she was both. Hürrem Sultan's death in 1558 did not end her story. It only began its retelling. Few women in Ottoman history left such a complicated and enduring legacy. To her supporters, she was a visionary, a queen who transformed the empire's traditions and carved a place for women in the highest echelons of power. To her critics, she was a manipulative foreigner whose ambition brought bloodshed and altered the natural course of succession. Both views paradoxically are true. In the Ottoman world, her role signalled the dawn of what historians later called the Sultanate of Women, a period when imperial consorts, mothers and daughters wielded unprecedented influence over politics. Hürrem's marriage to Suleiman set a new precedent. After her, other sultans would marry, and their wives and mothers would play key roles in court politics. In this sense, she was a trailblazer, altering the very structure of dynastic rule. Her charitable work cemented her as more than just a palace schemer. The Haseki Hürrem Sultan complex in Istanbul remained a hub of social welfare for centuries, feeding the poor and housing travellers. In Jerusalem, her public baths and aqueduct repairs became landmarks of her generosity. These acts of piety softened her image, reminding future generations that she was not only a power broker, but also a benefactor whose wealth served the public good. Yet her reputation abroad took on a more sinister cast. European envoys dubbed her Roxolana, painting her as a seductress who bewitched Suleiman and led him astray from reason. Plays, operas and novels in the West often portrayed her as the archetype of the dangerous, ambitious woman, a trope that both fascinated and frightened audiences. To them she embodied the exotic danger of the Ottoman court, where love and politics intertwined with lethal consequences. For modern historians, Hürrem is more than legend. She is evidence of how personal relationships could shape empires, how a woman once sold in a slave market could rise to alter the fate of nations. Her story is a reminder that power in history is not always wielded with swords and armies. Sometimes it rests in whispered counsel, letters sent across borders, and the determination of one extraordinary woman. Hürrem Sultan began life as a captive, but she ended it as an empress in all but name. Her shadow lingered long after her death, not just in Suleiman's grief, but in the empire she helped shape. Her name, whether praised or cursed, would never be forgotten. In ancient Greece, music was not considered a pastime. It was thought to be a force that flowed directly from the gods. Every sound, every rhythm, every melody was believed to carry divine power, capable of shaping the human soul and even influencing the order of the cosmos. According to myth, Apollo, the god of light and harmony, wielded the lyre as his sacred instrument, while the rustic god Pan breathed life into the reed pipes. Hermes, ever mischievous, was said to have invented the lyre by stretching strings across a tortoise shell. In this way, music's origin story was divine, its authority unquestionable. From this divine beginning, music seeped into every aspect of Greek culture. At religious festivals, hymns were sung in honour of the gods. In theatres, choruses used song to echo the emotions of the drama unfolding on stage. Warriors marched into battle to the steady beat of flutes and drums, while farmers sang work songs to keep their labour in rhythm with the seasons. For the Greeks, life without music was not life at all. It was as essential as bread, wine and olive oil. Yet music was not only entertainment or ritual, it was philosophy made audible. The early philosopher Pythagoras famously argued that music reflected the mathematics of the universe. By plucking strings and listening to the ratios between their tones, he believed he had uncovered the same laws that govern the movements of the planets. To him, music was proof that the cosmos itself was a harmony, a grand composition in which each human being played a part. This fusion of myth, ritual and philosophy meant that music was woven into identity, Greek children learned songs before they could read, absorbing not just melodies, but also moral lessons embedded within lyrics. Poets like Homer used rhythm and meter to preserve epic tales, ensuring they could be passed down through generations, even in a largely oral culture. So when we speak of the origins of Greek music, we are really speaking about the origins of Greek civilization itself. The lyre, the OWs, and the human voice were more than instruments. They were the threads binding people to their gods, to their communities, and to the very structure of the universe. Music wasn't an art form, it was the heartbeat of a culture. When we imagine the soundscape of ancient Greece, three instruments rise above all others: the lyre, the olos, and the kithara. Each carried not only a distinct tone, but also a cultural weight, symbolizing different aspects of Greek life. The lyre, perhaps the most iconic, was lightweight, portable, and played by both amateurs and professionals. Its structure was simple, a wooden frame with strings stretched across, plucked gently by the fingers, or with a plerum, but its cultural resonance was immense. The lyre was associated with education, poetry, and refinement. Young boys were taught to play it as part of their schooling, not just to make music, but to instill discipline and harmony in their characters. In Greek eyes, to strum the lyre was to align one's soul with order itself, echoing the balance of the cosmos. The olos, on the other hand, was a very different beast, a double-reeded pipe. It produced a piercing, almost haunting sound. Unlike the delicate strumming of the lyre, the olos demanded breath and force. Its tones described as wild, ecstatic, even intoxicating. It was often used in religious ceremonies, particularly those devoted to Dionysus, the god of wine, raillery, and madness. To hear the oars was to be swept into frenzy, to let the body move beyond reason. Its associations with passion and release balanced the lyre's association with order and logic, reflecting the duality that ran through Greek thought. Then came the kithara, a larger, more complex relative of the lyre used by professional musicians. Its deeper resonance and grander size made it suitable for performances in theatres and competitions. Kithara players, often highly trained and celebrated, were closer to rock stars than humble schoolboys. They competed in musical contests held at festivals where prestige and patronage awaited the best performers. Together these instruments painted a spectrum of Greek ideals. The lyre represented education and rationality, the olos unleashed emotion and ecstasy, and the kithara elevated performance into a public spectacle. To the Greeks, music was not confined to a single mood or function. It could soothe, intoxicate, or inspire depending on the instrument chosen. In this harmony of strings and pipes, Greece discovered the many faces of music, structured, wild, and majestic. Each instrument was more than wood or reed. It was a voice in the ongoing dialogue between order and chaos, reason and passion. In ancient Greece, music was not an optional luxury. It was stitched into the rhythm of daily existence. From the moment a child entered the world until their final rites, music was present, shaping the way Greeks thought, celebrated, and even mourned. In ancient Greece, music was considered essential to education, ritual, and daily life. Boys in Athens and Sparta learned the lyre alongside literacy and athletics, as music was believed to cultivate balance, self-control, and moral character. Hymns to Apollo represented clarity and order, while Dionysian festivals embraced frenzy and ecstasy. In theatres, music was inseparable from drama, with choruses shaping how audiences experienced both tragedy and comedy. To the Greeks, music was not just sound, but a reflection of their values, blending rationality with passion. Philosophers like Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle gave music profound meaning. Pythagoras linked music to mathematics and the harmony of the cosmos, seeing every note as part of universal order. Plato argued that music shaped character and society, warning that changing melodies could alter laws themselves. Aristotle emphasized music's power for catharsis and balance. Beyond philosophy, music also served medicine, with Apollo and his son Asclepius embodying the link between healing and melody. Greeks believed songs could calm emotions, restore harmony, and heal both individuals and communities. The influence of Greek music extended far beyond the city-states. Rome adopted Greek instruments and musicians, while philosophers like Cicero and Seneca preserved Greek ideas of music as moral training. Through medieval and Renaissance scholarship, Pythagoras' cosmic harmony shaped science and philosophy, even inspiring Kepler's astronomy. Greek modes and theories influenced Christian and Byzantine chant, becoming the foundation of Western music. Above all, the Greek conviction that music heals, teaches, and elevates the soul remains alive, reminding us that for them, melody was the sound of truth itself. The Greeks believed music was more than art. It was order, passion, and meaning woven into sound. Though their instruments have fallen silent, the legacy of Greek music shaped Rome, inspired the Middle Ages, and influenced the Renaissance. Its echoes still hum beneath Western culture, reminding us that while Greece has passed, its music remains within the very structure of how we understand the world. Joan of Arc's story begins in 1412 in the small farming village of Domremy in northeastern France. She was the daughter of Jacques d'Arc, a modest farmer, and Isabel, a pious woman. Like other children, Joan worked in the fields, spun wool, and prayed. Yet her childhood was overshadowed by the 100 Years' War, which left towns burned, villages ravaged, and France divided between the English, their Burgundian allies, and the uncrowned heir, Charles of Valois. At age 13, Joan began to hear voices and see visions. She claimed that St. Michael the Archangel appeared to her, urging her to remain pure and prepare for a divine mission. Later, she said, St. Catherine and St. Margaret joined him, commanding her to save France and restore its rightful king. For her neighbours, Joan seemed unusually devout, but what set her apart was her absolute certainty. She spoke of her mission not as a dream, but as a destiny given directly by God. By 16, Joan's visions became more urgent. The saints commanded her to act. Charles of Valois must be crowned king at Reims, and she was the one chosen to lead him there. For a poor peasant girl, the idea was outrageous. Women did not command armies or influence kings, yet Joan's conviction was unshakable. She believed heaven itself had entrusted her with the fate of France. Seeking a way forward, Joan went to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs to petition Robert de Baudricourt, a local commander loyal to Charles. At first he dismissed her as absurd, but Joan's persistence, calm confidence, and reputation for honesty began to sway opinion. When she spoke of a French defeat at Orléans before news of it reached the area, many saw it as proof of her divine guidance. Whether miracle or chance, it convinced Baudricourt, who at last agreed to send her to Charles. In early 1429, he agreed to send Joan to Charles. Disguised in men's clothing for protection on the dangerous journey, she rode across war-torn fronts, accompanied by a small escort. The image of a teenage girl in armour-like attire claiming a divine mission must have seemed surreal, yet her determination inspired those who travelled with her. After 11 days on horseback, Joan arrived at Chenol, where Charles was holding court. The girl from Domer, who had never been more than a peasant's daughter, now stood on the threshold of history, ready to convince a hesitant prince that God had sent her to save his crown. When Joan of Arc arrived at Chinon in early 1429, she faced her greatest test yet. Charles the Dauphin of France was desperate for hope but cautious of deception. France was losing the war. His claim to the throne was disputed and his court was riddled with doubt. Could this young peasant girl, barely 17, truly be sent by God to rescue him? Charles decided to test her. A meeting was arranged in the grand hall of the castle. But to challenge Joan's supposed divine insight, he concealed himself among the courtiers. Another man dressed in regal clothes was placed on the throne to pose as the doer. The expectation was simple. If Joan mistook the decoy for the real Charles, her credibility would collapse instantly. But when Joan entered the hall, she did not hesitate. Ignoring the figure on the throne, she walked straight through the crowd and bowed to Charles, who stood disguised among the nobles. Jantel Duchy is said to have declared, "God has sent me to aid you in your kingdom." The court was stunned. For Charles, surrounded by skeptics, it was a moment of awe. Whether by intuition, rumour, or divine guidance, Joan had passed her first trial. Charles was intrigued, but he needed more than theatrics. He arranged for Joan to be examined by churchmen at Poitiers, where her virginity, piety, and knowledge of faith were rigorously tested. The clerics, expecting to find a fraud, instead concluded that there was nothing heretical about her claims. She was declared a devout and virtuous maiden untainted by corruption. Her voices, they argued, could not be dismissed outright. In private, Joan also gave Charles a sign that convinced him of her sincerity. Sources differ on what exactly she revealed. Some claim she repeated a secret prayer he had once offered to God, others that she disclosed doubts he had never shared aloud. Whatever it was, it shook Charles to the core. From that moment he treated her mission with seriousness. Still, not everyone in the court was persuaded. Many nobles scoffed at the idea of following a teenage girl into battle. But Charles, hesitant by nature, had little else to cling to. Against all odds he agreed to grant Joan armour, a sword and a command. The girl from Dumbrai was about to step onto the battlefield, not as a mere messenger, but as a leader of men. When Joan of Arc first rode toward Orleans in April 1429, the city was on the brink of collapse. For months, English forces had surrounded it, choking off supplies and morale. The fall of Orleans would have been catastrophic for France, cementing English dominance and leaving Charles VII little hope of reclaiming his crown. To many, it seemed only a matter of time before the city surrendered. Into this desperate situation came Joan, a teenage girl clad in white armour, bearing a banner instead of a sword. Her arrival electrified the defenders. She spoke with absolute confidence, proclaiming that God had sent her to deliver the city. Soldiers who had been weary and demoralised suddenly felt a surge of courage. Chroniclers recorded that Joan rode through the streets promising victory, lifting spirits not with strategy alone, but with faith. She embodied hope at a moment when hope seemed impossible. Though she was not a trained commander, Joan was fearless in the field. She rode at the front lines, carrying her banner high, urging men to press forward when hesitation set in. She scolded the mercenaries for swearing, demanded discipline, and insisted that the army attend confession and mass before battle. To her, the fight was not merely military, it was sacred. The turning point came on May 7th, when the French launched an assault on the Terrell, the strongest English fortification guarding the bridge into the city. In the thick of the fighting, Joan was struck by an arrow that pierced her shoulder. For a moment, panic rippled through the French ranks, but instead of retreating, Joan pulled the arrow out herself, returned to the front and raised her banner once more. The sight of her, bloodied but unbroken, inspired the soldiers to storm the fort. By evening, the English were in retreat. The very next day, the siege was lifted. Against all expectation, Orleans was free. News of the victory spread like wildfire across France. To the faithful, it was a miracle. To skeptics, an unexplainable reversal of fortune. Either way, Joan had done what seasoned generals had failed to achieve. In the eyes of many, the peasant girl from Doma had proven herself chosen, not just by Charles, but by God. The legend of the Maid of Orleans was born. The victory at Orleans transformed Joan of Arc from a curious figure into a national heroine. Charles must be crowned king at Rheims, the traditional site of French coronations. Rheims lay deep in enemy-held territory, yet Joan pressed Charles to act, insisting that delay would only invite doubt. Her conviction was contagious, and in June 1429 the royal army marched northward. Towns surrendered without a fight, swayed by Joan's reputation. On July 17th, 1429, Charles was anointed with holy oil at Rheims with Joan beside him, fulfilling her mission and placing him on the throne through faith and audacity. The coronation at Rennes in July 1429 should have been Joan of Arc's crowning achievement, yet triumph quickly gave way to frustration. Joan urged Charles VII to press on and reclaim Paris, but the king, cautious and swayed by advisers, hesitated. The failed assault left Paris in English hands, crushing Joan. Her voices urged her to fight on, but her influence at court began to wane. Nobles grumbled at her growing fame, jealous and suspicious. By 1430, Joan turned her attention north to Compiègne, determined to defend it, riding once again into battle with her banner. On May 23rd, 1430, during a skirmish outside Compiègne, Joan was trapped and captured when the drawbridge was raised. Abandoned and surrounded, she was pulled from her horse. The Burgundians knew her value and sold her to the English. Charles VII, the man whose crown she had secured, made no move to rescue her. For Joan, the sense of betrayal was bitter. She had given everything for France, and now she was abandoned. The Maid of Orleans was a prisoner in English hands. After her capture, Joan of Arc was delivered to Rouen, where her enemies prepared a battlefield of clerics and judges. Her trial was designed to destroy her reputation and discredit Charles II's coronation. Overseen by Bishop Pierre Cosin, Joan was denied counsel, interrogated endlessly, and questioned about her visions and wearing of men's clothing. Yet she outwitted theologians, replying, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." Despite her courage, the outcome was predetermined. Under pressure, she signed an abjuration, but soon returned to her men's clothes, sealing her fate. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc met her grim end in the marketplace of Rouen. Declared a relapsed heretic, she was sentenced to death by fire. Only 19, she walked weeping and praying, asking for a cross to hold. Bound to the stake, she cried the name of Jesus as the flames rose. Eyewitnesses swore they saw a dove rise from the fire, and some claimed her heart remained unburned. Intended as her erasure, her execution instead made her a martyr. The English destroyed her body but could not extinguish her story. When the flames died, whispers spread that the maid had been unjustly executed. By 1453 the war was over and the English expelled, Charles III owing his crown to the coronation Joan made possible. In 1456, a retrial declared her innocent, her execution a miscarriage of justice. Writers, poets, and artists immortalized her, and centuries later she was canonized in 1920 as a saint. Burned as a heretic, she rose as a saint, her feast day celebrated worldwide. Joan of Arc's life remains a paradox, both fragile and indomitable, both political pawn and divine visionary. She lived only 19 years, yet altered the course of France. Her legacy endures not just in churches and cathedrals, but in the belief that faith, courage, and conviction can change the fate of nations,